I can't forgive him.
I know I left, but I didn't know the pregnancy.
And now after 10 years, I'm killing my twins. They don't even... I can't...
My name is Ivy. This is the part of my life where things are supposed to be settled, career stable, kids grown or almost grown, heart healed. But my heart is the one thing that never followed the plan. Thanks for coming to my channel. Please subscribe, like, and comment, so you will always be the first person to see my videos each time I upload new stories. I'm telling this story now because for 20 years, I kept it locked inside me. I buried it under survival, under motherhood, under pretending I was okay. And then one day, after 2 decades of silence, the past knocked on my door like it had every right to be there. When I was 22, I believed love was something you earned by being patient, understanding, and forgiving. I believed if you loved someone deeply enough, they would eventually choose you. I didn't grow up seeing healthy love. My parents stayed together out of habit, not happiness. My mother endured. My father existed. So I promised myself I would do things differently. I would love loudly, fully, honestly. I met him on a late summer evening in Virginia. It was one of those humid nights where the air sticks to your skin and your clothes cling no matter how little you're wearing. I was at a small friend's barbecue, the kind where people pretend they're not networking, but everyone secretly is. I remember laughing too loudly at a joke that wasn't that funny, holding a red plastic cup in my hand, feeling young and free and open. He walked in late, tall, calm, confident in a quiet way that made you notice him without him asking for attention. He had a slight smile that looked like it knew secrets, and when our eyes met, he didn't rush to look away. That should have warned me, but instead it made my stomach flutter. We talked about nothing that night. Music, work, how ridiculous traffic was. But there was something in the way he listened to me. He didn't interrupt. He didn't rush me. He looked at me like my words mattered. When he asked for my number, I gave it without hesitation. That was the beginning. He courted me slowly. Calls instead of texts. Long conversations that lasted past midnight. Weekend walks through downtown Alexandria, holding coffee cups, brushing hands, pretending we didn't feel electricity every time our fingers touched. He made me feel chosen, safe, seen. When he finally kissed me, it was gentle, respectful. The kind of kiss that convinces you this person would never hurt you. I trusted him. I gave him parts of myself I had promised to protect. Within months, he became my world, and I became convenient. I didn't see it at first, how plans were always around his schedule, how my needs were postponed with smooth explanations, how someday became his favorite word, but I was young, in love, and eager to be understanding. I told myself real love required patience. Then I got pregnant. I still remember the bathroom where I found out. Beige tiles, a cracked mirror, the buzzing sound of the fluorescent light overhead. I sat on the edge of the bathtub staring at that little plastic stick like it was speaking a foreign language. 2 lines, clear, unapologetic. My hands were shaking. I wasn't scared of being a mother. I was scared of telling him. When I finally did, his face changed in a way I had never seen before. The warmth drained from his eyes. His jaw tightened. He didn't yell. He didn't cry. He just stared at me like I had made a terrible mistake. He said, "That can't be mine," just like that. No questions, no concern, no discussion, denied. I remember feeling like the floor had disappeared beneath me. I tried to explain. Dates, timing, logic, love. He cut me off. He said I was trying to trap him. He said he wasn't ready. He said I must have been with someone else. I had never felt so insulted, so small, so disposable. When I asked him what he wanted me to do, he went quiet. Then he said something that still echoes in my head 20 years later. "You need to handle it. Handle it. like it was a stain, like it was a mistake, like it wasn't a life. He disappeared shortly after that, changed his number, stopped answering emails, vanished from my life like he had never existed. I cried for days, then weeks. Then I stopped crying because I didn't have the luxury anymore. I had rent to pay, a body that was changing, a future that no longer included the man I thought loved me. I moved apartments, took extra shifts, threw up quietly in office bathrooms, learned how to survive heartbreak while growing a human inside me. What he didn't know, what he never bothered to find out, was that I wasn't carrying one baby. I was carrying two. The day I found out I was having twins, I laughed and cried at the same time. The ultrasound room smelled like disinfectant and hope. The technician smiled and said, "Looks like you've got a full house." I nodded like I wasn't terrified. 2 heartbeats, 2 futures, 2 reasons to keep going. I named them in my head long before they were born. I talked to them at night. I promised them I would be enough. And I was. Raising twins alone in America is not a story people romanticize, and they shouldn't. It was exhaustion layered on exhaustion, bills stacked on bills, fear that sat in my chest like a permanent resident. But it was also love in its purest form, the kind of love that doesn't abandon you when things get hard. They grew. I aged. Life moved on. I didn't date seriously again for years. Every time a man asked about their father, my throat tightened. I learned to answer with calm indifference, even though the truth burned. He's not around. That was all. I didn't chase him for child support. I didn't beg him to be a father. Something inside me refused to give him that power. If he could deny them once, he didn't deserve to know them at all. Or so I thought. 20 years passed. Then one afternoon, while folding laundry in my quiet townhouse, my phone buzzed with a notification I never expected. A message request. From his name. My heart didn't race. It sank. I stared at my phone for a long time before I touched it. His name sat there like a ghost that had finally found my address. Same spelling, same profile picture energy, older now, grayer at the edges, but unmistakably him. My hands felt numb. I didn't feel anger first. I didn't feel curiosity. I felt something closer to disbelief, like my body refused to accept that time could fold in on itself like that. 20 years. 20 years of silence. And now this man thought he could just appear. I didn't open the message right away. I placed the phone face down on the kitchen counter and leaned against it, breathing slowly, staring at the refrigerator covered in magnets, grocery lists, and a faded photo of my twins at 10 years old, missing teeth and smiling like the world had never hurt them. My children were grown now. College age, strong, kind, opinionated, everything I fought to protect. And suddenly the man who denied their existence wanted access. Eventually, I picked up the phone. The message was short. "Hi, Ivy. I know this is unexpected. I've thought about this for a long time. I'd really like to talk." That was it. No apology. No acknowledgement. No mention of the pregnancy he denied. No mention of the children he abandoned. Just talk. I felt a laugh crawl up my throat, dry and humorless. The audacity was almost impressive. I didn't respond that day. Or the next. I needed space to feel everything without reacting. Because what people don't tell you about old wounds is that when they reopen, they don't hurt the way they used to. They hurt deeper, quieter, more intelligently. I kept living my life, went to work, cooked dinner, answered emails, but everything felt slightly tilted, like the world was leaning left, and I had to keep adjusting my balance. That night, I barely slept. The next morning, I sat at my kitchen table with a mug of coffee growing cold between my hands, and finally opened the rest of his messages. Because, yes, there were more. He talked about time passing, about regret, about wanting to make things right. He said he had found out recently that I had twins. That line stopped me. Found out recently, as if they were a rumor, as if they were a headline. As if he hadn't been there when I told him I was pregnant. My chest tightened. He said he wanted to meet them. He said he had a right to know his children. He said he was ready now, after 20 years. I closed my eyes and let the memories come, uninvited. I remembered standing in line at the pharmacy with swollen ankles, counting coins to pay for prenatal vitamins. I remembered holding one baby on my hip while the other cried in the crib, tears streaming down my face because I didn't know which one needed me more. I remembered missing work when they were sick, choosing them over promotions, choosing survival over dreams. Where was he then? He wasn't not ready. He was absent. There is a difference. I didn't tell my children right away. I needed to decide what I felt before opening a door that could never be closed again. They knew they had a biological father somewhere out there, but he was an abstract concept, like a country you've never visited. Real, but distant. I went for a walk that evening, letting the cool air sting my cheeks. The neighborhood was quiet, porch lights flickering on one by one as families settled into their routines. Somewhere nearby, someone was grilling. Somewhere else, laughter spilled through an open window. Life went on. Mine had, too. I realized something as I walked past houses full of stories I didn't know. I wasn't the same woman he left behind. I wasn't the scared 22-year-old begging to be believed. I was a mother, a survivor, a woman who had built a life with her bare hands, and that made me dangerous to the past. I finally replied 2 days later, "I'm not sure what you expect from me. You denied my pregnancy and disappeared. My children are grown now. This isn't something I take lightly." I stared at the screen after sending it, heart pounding, waiting for the familiar feeling of rejection. Instead, his response came quickly. I was young. I was scared. I made mistakes. But they're still my kids. My jaw clenched. They are still my kids, not our kids. Not your kids. My kids. Possessive without permission. I typed, deleted, typed again. They're my children because I raised them alone. You don't get to rewrite history. There was a pause this time. Then I want to meet them, Ivy. I deserve that chance. That word again. Deserve. Something inside me snapped, not violently, but decisively. I called him. He sounded surprised, like he didn't expect me to actually confront him with my voice. His voice was deeper now, slower. But the same calm tone that once made me feel safe. We exchanged awkward pleasantries, pretending this was a normal conversation between two adults who hadn't shattered each other's lives. Then I said it. You don't get to come back and claim anything. You denied them before they took their first breath. He sighed, like I was being unreasonable. Ivy, I can't change the past. I'm trying to be here now. That's convenient, I said quietly, now that the hard part is over. He was silent. I pressed on. You weren't there when I was scared. You weren't there when I was sick. You weren't there when I named them, held them, stayed up all night praying I wouldn't fail them. You don't get to skip 20 years and show up asking for access. He said something then that made my hands shake. I've thought about this a lot. I believe they should know where they come from. I laughed. They know exactly where they come from. They come from me. When I hung up, I realized my entire body was trembling. I sank onto the couch and stared at the ceiling, feeling like I had just run a marathon through memory and pain. I knew I couldn't protect them forever. They were adults. They deserved honesty. But honesty didn't mean surrender. That weekend, I invited them over for dinner. I cooked their favorite meals like it was any other Sunday. Pasta, garlic bread, too much food, like always. We laughed. We talked about school and plans and life. And then when the plates were cleared and the room settled, I told them, Their reactions were different. One was angry, the other was quiet. Neither was surprised. They asked questions I had asked myself years ago. Why now? Why didn't he fight? What does he want? I told them the truth. I don't know. And that was the hardest part. That night after they left, I sat alone again in my quiet house, listening to the ticking clock in the hallway. The past had officially collided with the present. There was no undoing it. But there was still choice. And as I sat there, I knew one thing with absolute certainty. Forgiveness does not mean access. Biology does not mean entitlement. And love does not arrive 20 years late demanding a seat at the table. He wanted to claim children he never claimed responsibility for, and I wasn't sure I could ever forgive that. After that night, nothing felt simple anymore. My children, my twins, didn't call him Dad. They didn't even say his name out loud at first. He was referred to as him, like a shadow that had finally stepped into the light and made everyone uncomfortable. Days passed, then weeks. He kept messaging. Not aggressively, not angrily, almost carefully, like someone testing thin ice with the tip of their shoe. He asked how they were doing, asked what they studied, asked what music they liked. Each question irritated me more than the last. He wanted highlights without having lived the story. One afternoon, while I was sitting at my desk at work, staring at spreadsheets that refused to make sense, my phone buzzed again. I'd like to meet them. Even just once. I'll come to you. I won't pressure anyone. I closed my eyes. This wasn't about him anymore. It was about my children's autonomy, their right to choose without being manipulated by guilt or absence disguised as redemption. That night, I told them he wanted to meet. They didn't answer right away. One of them finally said, "I don't hate him." The other said, "I don't trust him." Both statements were true. We agreed on boundaries, public place, one meeting, no promises, no expectations, no rewriting the past. And if at any point they felt uncomfortable, we would walk away. I informed him of the conditions. He agreed quickly, too quickly. The day of the meeting arrived on a gray Saturday afternoon. We chose a quiet cafe in downtown Baltimore, neutral territory. Not my home, not theirs, not a place soaked in memory. I arrived early. The cafe smelled like roasted beans and rain-damp coats. Soft music played overhead. People typed on laptops, living their normal lives, unaware that a reckoning was about to happen at a corner table near the window. My children arrived together. Shoulders squared, eyes alert. And then he walked in. Time does strange things to faces. It adds lines where laughter once lived and shadows where confidence used to sit. But I recognized his posture immediately, the way he scanned the room before committing to a direction. When he saw us, he stopped. For a moment, he just stood there. I didn't feel satisfaction. I didn't feel triumph. I felt tired. He approached slowly, like he was afraid we might disappear. He greeted me first, awkward, polite, distant. Then he looked at them. His eyes filled. And something about that almost made me angry. Tears are easy when you arrive late. The conversation was stiff at first. Small talk, weather, school, work. He told stories about himself that didn't matter. Tried to be relatable, tried to be likable. I watched my children carefully. Their faces were neutral, but their bodies were tense. They listened, asked a few questions, gave nothing away. Then one of them asked him directly, "Why did you leave?" The cafe noise seemed to fade. He swallowed. He said he was scared. He said he wasn't ready. He said he made the worst mistake of his life. He looked at me when he said it. I didn't respond. Then my other child asked, "Did you really think we weren't yours?" He hesitated. That hesitation told me everything. The meeting lasted just under an hour. When it ended, there were no hugs, no tears. just a polite goodbye that felt heavier than shouting ever could. As we walked out, I felt a strange calm settle over me, like something unfinished had finally found its punctuation. Later that night, one of my children came into the kitchen while I was washing dishes. "I don't think he deserves you," they said quietly. I smiled. "I know, but life doesn't end with one meeting." He continued reaching out. He asked for more time, more meetings, more chances. He said he wanted to build a relationship. That phrase made my chest tighten. You build relationships with consistency, with presence, with showing up when it's inconvenient, not with apologies after the work is done. One evening, he crossed a line. He messaged my child directly, without telling me. That was when my patience finally ran out. I called him immediately. "You don't get to bypass me," I said, my voice steady but sharp. "You don't get to insert yourself into their lives without respect." "They're adults," he replied. "They can decide for themselves." "Yes," I said, "and they decided to meet you once, not to hand you access like a reward." There was anger in his voice now. "I'm their father." "No," I said, "you're their biology." Silence. Then he said something I will never forget. "I think you're punishing me." I laughed. "This isn't punishment. This is the consequence." That night I sat alone again. Lights dimmed, rain tapping against the windows. I thought about forgiveness, about what it actually means. People talk about it like it's a gift you give someone else. But forgiveness isn't about them. It's about whether you can release the grip of the past without reopening the wound. And I realized something else. I didn't hate him. Hate would have meant he still had power. What I felt was something quieter, firmer, boundaries. Weeks later, my children made their own choices. They spoke to him occasionally, carefully, guardedly, on their terms. I stayed out of it, unless invited. And in that distance, I finally saw the full picture. He wasn't here because he loved them. He was here because regret had found him, because aging had softened him, because loneliness had finally introduced him to accountability. But accountability that arrives late doesn't undo damage, it just explains it. One night, while scrolling through old photos on my phone, I found one of myself at 22. Smiling, hopeful, in love. I whispered to her, "You survived." And I meant it. Time has a way of slowing down after emotional earthquakes. The weeks that followed felt quieter, not because there was peace, but because everyone was recalibrating. My children moved with a new awareness, like people who had just learned a truth that couldn't be unlearned. I watched them more closely than I meant to, not out of fear, but out of respect. They were navigating something deeply personal, and for the first time in their lives, I couldn't carry it for them. I stayed busy. Work filled my weekdays, long meetings, deadlines, office lights that hummed softly above my head, while I pretended spreadsheets mattered more than the weight in my chest. Evenings were calmer, too calm sometimes. I'd cook dinner for one, wash dishes slowly, sit on the couch with the TV playing something I wasn't really watching, and occasionally, I'd think of him, not with longing, with clarity. One night he called unexpectedly. I almost didn't answer, but avoidance had never healed anything, so I picked up. "I just wanted to check on you," he said. I closed my eyes. "Why?" I asked. He hesitated. "Because this affects you too." I let out a small breath. "You don't get to suddenly care about my emotional well-being. That's not fair," he replied. I laughed softly. Neither was denying a pregnancy. Silence settled between us, thick and heavy. Then he said, "I've changed." That sentence used to make my heart soften. Now it just made me tired. "Change doesn't erase impact," I said, "and growth doesn't entitle you to forgiveness." "You really can't forgive me?" he asked. There it was, the question he had been circling for months. I didn't answer right away, because forgiveness is not a yes or no question. It's layered, complicated, personal. I don't know, I said honestly, but even if I do, it won't look like what you want. After that call, something shifted inside me, not dramatically, quietly. I realized I had been measuring my reactions against his expectations without meaning to, wondering if I was being too harsh, too cold, too guarded. But guarding yourself after being abandoned is not cruelty, it's wisdom. My children began setting firmer boundaries of their own. One stopped responding altogether. The other kept conversations light and infrequent. No emotional intimacy, no vulnerability, just a polite distance. He didn't take it well. He blamed me. He said I had poisoned them against him. That accusation hurt more than I expected, because it ignored the truth. I didn't have to poison anything. The truth stood on its own. One afternoon, I met a friend for coffee, someone who had known me back then, someone who remembered the tears, the pregnancy, the silence. After listening quietly, she said, "Do you realize how strong you were?" I shrugged. I didn't have a choice. She shook her head. You always have a choice. You chose to stay. That stayed with me. I chose to stay. I chose to raise two humans with love instead of bitterness. I chose not to chase a man who had already decided to leave. I chose dignity, even when it was lonely. And suddenly his late return felt smaller. Another message came a few days later. I feel like you're punishing me forever. I stared at it for a long time before replying. I'm not punishing you. I'm living with the reality you created. I put my phone down and felt free. That night I stood in front of the bathroom mirror, studying my face, the fine lines around my eyes, the softness where sharpness used to be, the strength that had replaced innocence. I looked like a woman who had lived, and I liked her. A few weeks later, my children sat me down. They thanked me for not forcing a relationship, for telling the truth without bitterness, for letting them decide. That was when I cried, not because I was sad, but because I had done it right. I don't know what the future holds for their relationship with him. That's their journey now, not mine. What I do know is this. He came back looking for forgiveness. He came back looking for closure. He came back looking to claim something he once rejected. But life doesn't work like that. You don't get to abandon love and return decades later expecting it to recognize you. And as for me, I'm finally at peace. Not because he returned, but because I no longer needed him to. Peace doesn't arrive all at once. It slips in quietly, like light through half-open curtains. You don't notice it at first. You just realize one day that your chest doesn't feel as tight when you breathe. That's how it happened for me. Weeks turned into months. The tension that once lived permanently in my shoulders began to loosen. I stopped checking my phone compulsively, stopped rehearsing conversations in my head, stopped wondering what I should feel. I started feeling what I actually felt, and what I felt was acceptance, not of what he did, but of who I had become because of it. One evening I sat on my porch, wrapped in a cardigan, watching dusk settle over the neighborhood. The air smelled like fresh-cut grass and distant rain. A couple walked past, holding hands, laughing about something small and private. I watched them without envy. That surprised me. There was a time when love stories made me ache, when I wondered what my life would have looked like if things had gone differently, if he had stayed, if he had believed me, if I hadn't had to be strong so early. But that night I didn't grieve the what if. I honored the what was. He tried again, this time with a long message, thoughtful, emotional, carefully worded. He talked about therapy, about regret, about wishing he could go back and make different choices, about how seeing the twins awakened something in him he didn't know was missing. I read it slowly. Then I put my phone down. I didn't respond right away. Not because I didn't know what to say, but because I knew exactly what to say and I wanted to be sure I meant it. The next morning, sunlight spilled across my kitchen floor as I made coffee. Birds argued loudly on the power line outside my window. Life felt normal, grounded, real. I sat at the table and typed, "I believe people can grow. I believe you regret your choices. But regret doesn't rewrite history. I carried the weight of your absence for 20 years. I carried it alone. I don't owe you forgiveness in a way that makes you comfortable, and I don't owe you access to my life to prove that I've healed." I paused, then I added, "I wish you peace, but I'm choosing mine." I sent it, and for the first time since he reappeared, my hands didn't shake. That was the last message I sent him. He replied once more, shorter this time, less polished, more wounded. "I guess this is goodbye." I didn't answer. Some goodbyes don't need an audience. My children noticed the change in me before I did. "You seem lighter," one of them said during a phone call. I smiled. I feel lighter. They didn't ask about him anymore, and neither did I. Whatever relationship they chose or didn't choose was theirs. I had given them honesty, stability, and love. The rest was out of my hands, and that was okay. I started doing things just for myself. Long walks without a destination, music playing while I cooked instead of silence, saying no without explanation. I even went on a date, nothing dramatic. Coffee, conversation, laughter that surprised me. I wasn't looking for forever. I wasn't looking to be saved. I was just open, and that felt like growth. Sometimes, late at night, memories still visited me. The bathroom floor, the ultrasound room, the empty space beside me where he should have been. But they didn't hurt the way they used to. They felt complete, like chapters that had finally found their ending, even if it wasn't the one I imagined. Here's the truth people don't like to hear. Not every apology deserves forgiveness. Not every return deserves a reunion. And not every biological connection deserves a relationship. Love is shown, presence is proven, and parenting is earned. He denied the pregnancy. That denial shaped my life. And while I no longer carry anger, I carry memory. Memory is not bitterness. Memory is wisdom. I don't tell this story because I'm broken. I tell it because I survived, because somewhere out there is a woman sitting alone, staring at a positive test, or raising children by herself, or being contacted years later by someone who once walked away and she thinks she has to make space for them to prove she's healed. She doesn't. Healing doesn't look like reopening wounds for someone else's comfort. Sometimes healing looks like closing the door gently and walking forward without looking back. There are moments when the past tries to reintroduce itself quietly. Not through messages, not through phone calls, but through memory. It happens when I least expect it, standing in line at the grocery store, hearing a song from my 20s, watching a father teach his child how to ride a bike. The image hits me softly now, not like a punch, but like a reminder of a life I once imagined and had to grieve. For a long time, I thought grief only belonged to death. I was wrong. Some of the deepest grief comes from people who are still alive but chose not to show up. One Sunday afternoon, my children came home again. They sat on the floor of my living room, backs against the couch like they used to when they were younger. The house felt full in a way it hadn't in years. We talked about everything and nothing. Then one of them said, "I think I understand you more now." I looked at them. "What do you mean?" They shrugged. "Why you were so protective. Why you didn't talk badly about him but also never defended him." I nodded slowly. I didn't want my pain to become your burden, I said. You deserved your own truth. They were quiet for a moment. Then the other said, I don't think I need him. That sentence landed gently but firmly. Not with anger, not with bitterness, with certainty. And in that moment I knew I had done the hardest thing a parent can do. I had let them see reality without shaping it to my wounds. Later that night, after they had gone back to their lives, I sat alone again. But the loneliness felt different now. It wasn't hollow. It was spacious, peaceful. I thought about the younger version of myself, the Ivy who believed love meant endurance, the Ivy who thought patience could fix abandonment, the Ivy who blamed herself for a man's refusal to take responsibility. I wish I could sit beside her. I'd tell her this. You didn't imagine the red flags. You didn't deserve the denial. And you didn't fail. You adapted. People often ask me now, carefully, respectfully, if I ever regretted not forcing him to be involved, if I ever wondered what life would have been like if I had chased him harder. The answer surprises them. No, because presence that must be begged for is not presence. And love that must be convinced is not love. I saw him once more. Not planned, not intentional, just coincidence. I was leaving a bookstore downtown, arms full of novels I probably wouldn't finish, when I saw him across the street. Older still, slower, alone. Our eyes met briefly. He smiled. I nodded. And that was it. No conversation, no confrontation. No emotional unraveling, just two people who shared a past and nothing else. I walked away without looking back. That's how I knew I was free. There's something powerful about not needing closure from someone who couldn't give you honesty. Closure is not something another person hands you. It's something you claim. I live a quieter life now. Morning light through open windows, music playing while I clean, phone calls with my children that end in laughter. Love still exists in my world, not dramatic, not consuming, but steady, kind. And when I think about love, real love, I think about this. Love doesn't disappear when things get hard. Love doesn't deny truth. Love doesn't return decades later asking to be forgiven without first acknowledging the damage it caused. Love stays. I used to think forgiveness was the final chapter of every painful story. Now I know better. Sometimes acceptance is the ending, and sometimes the bravest thing you can say is, I can't forgive you, and I don't have to. And this is not a story about revenge. It's not even a story about heartbreak anymore. It's a story about boundaries, about growth, about choosing peace over performance, about understanding that some people don't lose you because you weren't enough. They lose you because they didn't show up. As the seasons changed, so did the way the story lived inside me. It stopped feeling like an open wound and started feeling like a scar. Still there, still visible if you know where to look, but no longer bleeding, no longer defining every movement I made. I used to think scars meant weakness. Now I know they mean survival. There was a morning, not long after that accidental encounter outside the bookstore, when I woke up before my alarm. The room was quiet, washed in pale early light. I lay there for a moment, listening to my own breathing, feeling the weight of the blanket, the calm of an ordinary day waiting to begin. And it hit me. I was happy. Not euphoric, not wildly excited, just steady. That kind of happiness doesn't announce itself. It settles. It stays. My children called more often around that time, not because they needed advice, not because something was wrong, just because they wanted to talk, to share small details, a class they enjoyed, a friend they were worried about, a plan for the future. That's when I realized something important. They didn't feel like they were missing anything. They didn't feel incomplete. Because they weren't raised in absence. They were raised in love. Every now and then, I'd catch myself wondering if he ever truly understood what he lost. Not just children, but the chance to grow alongside them. The chance to be shaped by sleepless nights and school plays and scraped knees. The chance to become more than he was. But then I'd stop myself. Understanding was no longer my responsibility. I stopped framing my life around what happened to me and started honoring what I built despite it. A home filled with warmth, even when it was quiet. Children who knew they were chosen every single day. A version of myself that no longer apologized for having boundaries. And perhaps most importantly, I stopped explaining my story to people who wanted it wrapped up neatly with forgiveness and reconciliation. Some stories don't resolve that way. Some stories end with strength instead of softness. There's a narrative people like to push, especially when it comes to women. That we should be accommodating, that we should make space, that we should forgive to prove we've healed. But healing doesn't always look gentle. Sometimes healing looks like standing firm and saying, "This is where I stop carrying what isn't mine." I think back to the day he denied the pregnancy, the shock, the disbelief, the way my heart cracked open and never quite closed the same way again. And I wish I could tell that younger version of me one thing. That moment did not break you. It forged you. I don't hate him. I don't love him. He exists now as a lesson, not a longing. And that, to me, is the truest form of release. If there's anything I want people to understand from my story, it's this. Someone can come back later and still not deserve a place in your present. Someone can regret what they did and still not be entitled to your forgiveness. And you can move forward fully without rewriting the past to make others feel better. I still believe in love, but I believe in a different kind now, the kind that shows up. The kind that doesn't disappear when responsibility arrives. The kind that doesn't need 20 years to realize what mattered. And as for me, I wake up each day knowing I did the best I could with what I was given. I raised my children with honesty and care. I protected my peace when it mattered most. And when the past came knocking, I didn't let it undo me. I listened, I responded, and then I chose myself. And my story isn't about what he lost, it's about what I kept. After that realization settled in me, life didn't suddenly become poetic or perfect. Healing is rarely cinematic. Most days it looked like repetition. Waking up early, making coffee, sitting in traffic, answering emails, folding laundry that never seemed to end. But there was something different underneath all of it. A quiet steadiness. Like I had finally stopped bracing myself for impact. I didn't jump into dating seriously. I wasn't afraid of men. I was cautious of patterns. I paid attention to how people handled discomfort, how they spoke about responsibility, how they reacted when things didn't go their way. I had learned the hard way that love isn't proven in affection but in accountability. Sometimes, when coworkers talked about co-parenting struggles or bitter custody battles, they'd look at me with curiosity. "You're lucky," one of them once said. "At least you didn't have to deal with a difficult ex." I smiled politely. They didn't understand that absence can be just as heavy as conflict, sometimes heavier. When someone is present and problematic, you at least know where you stand. When someone disappears, they leave behind questions that echo for years. But I didn't explain. I rarely did. One evening, I sat at my dining table with a glass of wine, sorting through old documents I'd been meaning to organize for years. Birth certificates, school records, old insurance papers, things I'd kept because life required proof of everything. I came across a hospital bracelet. Mine. Yellowed slightly with time, my name still legible. The date burned into my memory, the day my twins were born. I held it between my fingers and felt something tighten in my chest. That day had been chaos and miracle intertwined. Bright hospital lights, nurses moving quickly, pain that blurred into something almost spiritual. I remembered gripping the bed rails, sweat on my forehead, fear and determination wrestling inside me. I remembered the silence on the other side of the room. No partner pacing nervously, no hand to squeeze, no voice telling me I wasn't alone, just me. And yet, I had never been stronger. I wondered briefly if he ever thought about that day, if he ever imagined what it was like for me, or if the version of events he carried in his mind had softened the reality to something easier to live with. People do that. They rewrite memories to survive their own guilt. I stopped wondering. There was a moment, one quiet night, when doubt tried to creep back in. I was lying in bed, staring at the ceiling fan as it spun lazily overhead, when the familiar question surfaced. Was I too hard on him? It startled me how quickly that thought tried to take root. How easily women are trained to second-guess boundaries. How often we're encouraged to soften, reconsider, accommodate. But then another memory rose to meet it. The look on his face when I told him I was pregnant. The cold certainty. The denial. That memory didn't argue. It simply existed. And the doubt dissolved. I realized then that forgiveness is often confused with moral superiority, as if forgiving someone proves you're evolved, enlightened, above it all. But forgiveness isn't a performance. It's a private internal shift. And mine hadn't shifted in that direction. What had shifted was my need for validation. I no longer needed him to acknowledge my pain for it to be real. One afternoon, while cleaning out my email inbox, I found an old message thread from years ago. Emails I had sent him after he disappeared. Short at first, then longer, then quieter, then none at all. I read them slowly. There was no shame in them, only hope. And hope is not weakness. It's evidence that you believed in something once. I deleted the thread. Not out of anger, out of completion. As summer approached, my home began to feel different. Lighter, brighter. I opened windows more often, let sunlight spill into rooms that had once felt heavy with memory. I repainted my bedroom, a soft, neutral color. Nothing dramatic. Just fresh, clean. Mine. Change doesn't always need witnesses. One day I received a message from him again. It had been months. I noticed the last one of them stopped talking to me. I think you influenced that. I stared at the screen, and for the first time, I didn't feel anything. No spike of anger, no urge to defend myself, no need to correct him. I typed one sentence. I didn't influence the truth, and that was all. I blocked his number after that, not impulsively, deliberately. Some doors don't need dramatic slamming. They just need to be closed. There's a myth that strong women are born that way. We're not. We become strong when we have no other choice, when survival demands it, when love fails us and responsibility doesn't. Strength is built in moments no one applauds, in grocery store aisles, in hospital hallways, in lonely apartments at night, in decisions made without reassurance. I don't tell this story for sympathy. I tell it because stories like mine are common but rarely spoken out loud. Women raising children alone because someone walked away. Men returning years later expecting grace without accountability. Society urging forgiveness without asking who paid the price. I paid the price, and I would do it again for my children. But I will not pretend it didn't cost me something. As I write this, I'm sitting in my living room. Evening light stretching across the floor, a faint hum of traffic outside, my phone resting nearby, silent. I'm not waiting for it to ring. That alone tells me how far I've come. There's a strange moment that happens after you close a door for good. At first, you expect noise, regret, echoes, some dramatic emotional backlash that confirms you did the right thing. But what usually comes instead is silence, thick, unfamiliar silence. And if you're not careful, that silence can scare you into reopening doors that were meant to stay closed. I let myself sit in that silence. I didn't rush to fill it. For the first time in a long time, my life wasn't reacting to someone else's choices. It was responding only to my own. I started noticing small things again. The way morning light landed on the kitchen counter around 7:15. The way my coffee tasted better when I drank it slowly instead of gulping it between responsibilities. The way my body felt less tense when I wasn't bracing for emotional disruption. For years, even when he wasn't physically present, he occupied mental space. A question mark, a loose end, an unresolved chapter. His return had briefly reopened that space, but now, finally, it was closing for real. And closure, I learned, doesn't always feel satisfying. Sometimes it just feels quiet. I didn't tell many people that I blocked him. Not because it was a secret, but because it wasn't a dramatic decision. It was maintenance. Like locking your door at night, like wearing a seatbelt, like protecting what matters without needing applause. My children didn't ask. They noticed, and that was enough. One evening, one of them called me late. Not panicked, not upset, just thoughtful. I was thinking about something, they said. Do you ever wonder who you would have been if things were different? I leaned back against the couch, staring at the ceiling. All the time, I said honestly. But I don't miss that version of me. There was a pause. I like who you are, they said. You feel solid. That word stayed with me. Solid. Not hardened, not closed off, not bitter, just grounded. I realized something important then. My children didn't grow up watching a woman who was abandoned. They grew up watching a woman who adapted. That distinction matters. As fall approached, routines shifted again. Classes resumed. Work picked up. The world moved forward, indifferent to personal revelations. And I liked that. I liked that my healing didn't need to be extraordinary to be real. Every now and then, curiosity would flicker. Where was he now? Was he lonely? Did he regret more than he admitted? But curiosity no longer demanded answers. It passed like weather. I thought often about forgiveness not as an action, but as a concept people love to romanticize. Forgiveness is presented as the final stage of emotional maturity, as if withholding it means you're stuck. But I had moved forward without it. I wasn't anchored to resentment. I wasn't replaying arguments. I wasn't fantasizing about confrontation. I was simply done. And that forced me to accept something uncomfortable. Forgiveness isn't required for peace. There was a day when I ran into his sister. Pure coincidence. I was at a grocery store a few towns over, reaching for a carton of eggs when I heard my name spoken cautiously behind me. I turned. She looked surprised, older, softer around the edges, but unmistakably familiar. We exchanged polite greetings, the kind adults use when history hangs heavy between them. She hesitated, then said, "He talks about you sometimes." I nodded. "I hope he's okay," I said, meaning it. She studied me. "You seem—" "Well, I am," I replied. She looked like she wanted to say more, but didn't. And I was grateful. Not every conversation deserves continuation. Driving home, I thought about how strange it is that people often expect pain to leave visible damage, that survival should look jagged, broken. But survival can look calm. It can look like grocery shopping on a Tuesday afternoon. It can look like a woman driving home with music playing softly, not rushing, not spiraling. It can look like peace. One night, sorting through photos on my laptop, I found videos from when my twins were toddlers. Unsteady steps, baby laughter, high-pitched squeals of joy. I watched them alone, tears slipping down my face not from sadness but from awe. I did that. I raised them, without help, without validation, without someone telling me I was doing it right. And I did it well. There's a specific grief that comes with realizing someone chose not to be part of something beautiful. It's not grief for yourself. It's grief for what they'll never know. But that grief no longer belongs to me. It belongs to him. I stopped feeling the need to explain my story to people who responded with discomfort. Some listeners want redemption arcs. Some want reconciliation. Some want tidy endings. Life doesn't always offer those. Sometimes the ending is simply clarity. Months passed, no messages, no updates, no disruptions. And slowly my nervous system adjusted to the absence of chaos. I slept better, laughed easier, thought less about the past. Healing isn't dramatic, it's repetitive. One afternoon, while walking through a park, I saw a young pregnant woman sitting alone on a bench, hands resting on her belly, staring into the distance. I didn't know her story, but I recognized the posture. I wanted to sit beside her and say everything would be okay, that she was stronger than she knew, that whatever happened next wouldn't define her worth. I didn't, but I carried that tenderness with me the rest of the day. This story isn't about vengeance. It isn't about winning. It's about ownership, of choices, of boundaries, of a life built intentionally. He returned after 20 years expecting access to something he had once rejected. What he found instead was a woman who no longer needed permission to protect herself. There comes a point in life when you stop asking questions that no longer serve you. Not because you suddenly have all the answers, but because you finally understand which questions cost too much to keep asking. That was where I found myself toward the end of this journey, with clarity that didn't need permission, and peace that didn't depend on anyone else's remorse. I didn't wake up one day feeling triumphant. There was no dramatic turning point where everything suddenly made sense. Instead, it felt like waking up after a long illness and realizing the fever had broken sometime in the night. You don't know the exact moment it happened. You just know you can breathe again. That was how I knew it was over. One evening I sat alone at my dining table, the house quiet except for the ticking of the wall clock. The sun had already dipped below the horizon, leaving behind that deep blue shade that settles just before night fully arrives. I had my laptop open, not to work, but to write. I wasn't writing for an audience. I wasn't writing to confront anyone. I was writing because for years my story had lived inside me unfinished, heavy with pauses and swallowed sentences. I needed to see it laid out, not as trauma but as truth. As I typed, memories came in waves. The early days of love, when hope felt endless and the future felt wide open. The way I used to imagine a life that included partnership, shared responsibility, someone to lean on when things got hard. I remembered how easily I believed promises back then, how I mistook confidence for commitment. Then came the shift, the moment when love revealed its limits. The denial. That moment had split my life in two, before and after. Before, when I still believed love would save me. After, when I realized survival would have to be enough. I wrote about the pregnancy. The fear that sat heavy in my chest, the quiet panic of realizing I was on my own, the loneliness that wrapped around me at night when the world felt too big and I felt too small. I wrote about the twins, how they arrived not as burdens, but as anchors, how their cries grounded me when my thoughts tried to drift into despair, how their existence gave me a reason to stand up even when my body begged to collapse. I wrote about strength, not the glamorous kind people celebrate, but the quiet kind that forms when you have no alternative. And as I wrote, something inside me softened. The next morning I met my children for brunch. We sat at a small cafe near campus, sunlight pouring through large windows, the smell of coffee and baked bread filling the air. They looked older every time I saw them, not just physically, but in the way they spoke, the way they held themselves. They talked about their plans, about dreams that extended far beyond anything I had imagined at their age. I listened, smiling, feeling that familiar mix of pride and disbelief. At one point, one of them reached across the table and squeezed my hand. "You know," they said, "I used to wonder if something was wrong with us, like maybe we weren't enough for him to stay." My heart clenched. "And now?" I asked quietly. "Now I know it had nothing to do with us." That sentence landed gently but firmly, like something finally settling into place. I realized then that my greatest success wasn't just raising them, it was protecting their sense of worth. Later that day, driving home, I let myself cry. Not the sharp, painful tears of heartbreak, but the slow, releasing kind that comes when something long held finally loosens its grip. I cried for the younger version of myself who carried shame that wasn't hers. I cried for the nights I spent wondering if I could have done something differently. I cried for the years I spent believing that love meant endurance. And when the tears stopped, I felt lighter. In the weeks that followed, I noticed how little space he occupied in my thoughts. He had become a reference point, not a presence, a chapter, not a character. His name no longer triggered a reaction in my body. No tension, no anger, just neutrality. That, I realized, was my closure. Not forgiveness, not reconciliation, neutrality. People sometimes misunderstand what it means to move on. They imagine it requires rewriting the past, softening the truth, or granting absolution. But moving on doesn't mean pretending the damage didn't happen. It means you stop letting the damage dictate your present. I didn't need him to admit anything anymore. I didn't need him to understand my pain. I didn't need him to validate my experience. I had done that myself. One afternoon, I went back to that park where I used to walk when the twins were young, pushing a double stroller, exhaustion etched into every step. The park looked different now, or maybe I did. Parents chased toddlers across the grass. Children laughed, their voices ringing out like bells. I sat on a bench and watched. I remembered how uncertain I felt back then, how afraid I was of making mistakes, how often I wondered if I was failing them. And yet, here we were. They were thriving. I smiled to myself, feeling something close to reverence for that younger woman who kept going even when she didn't know how. I've thought a lot about accountability, about how society often extends endless grace to those who walk away, while expecting those who stay to carry the weight quietly. We celebrate return, redemption, late apologies, while overlooking the years of labor it took to survive the absence. But accountability isn't loud. It doesn't beg for recognition. It shows up every day and does the work. I did the work. Toward the end, I realized something else too, something I hadn't fully acknowledged before. I didn't just raise children alone. I rebuilt myself. I learned to trust my judgment. I learned to listen to discomfort instead of dismissing it. I learned that love without responsibility is just desire, and desire alone cannot sustain a life. Those lessons didn't come easily. They were earned. If he ever truly understands what happened, it won't be because I explained it to him. It will be because time finally forced him to sit with his choices without distraction. And if he never understands, that's okay too. Understanding is not required for my peace. There's a strange freedom in no longer being angry. Anger burns fast. It demands energy. It keeps you tied to the source of your pain. Peace, on the other hand, is quiet. It doesn't announce itself. It simply stays. I don't regret my life. I don't regret the path I took, even though it was hard. I don't regret not forcing forgiveness where it didn't belong. What I regret if anything, is how long it took me to realize that my worth was never up for debate. If someone listening to this story is standing at the beginning of something similar, facing abandonment, denial, or the sudden collapse of a future they believed in, I want them to know this. You are not weak for hoping. You are not foolish for loving. And you are not broken because someone failed you. Sometimes the strongest thing you can do is keep going without closure, without apology, without permission. As for me, my life continues quietly. Morning routines, phone calls, laughter, occasional sadness that passes like a cloud. I don't live in the past. I carry it respectfully, like something that shaped me but no longer controls me. He denied the pregnancy. He walked away. He came back 20 years later wanting to claim what he once rejected. And I didn't forgive him not out of bitterness, but out of honesty. Because forgiveness is a choice, not an obligation, and my choice was peace. There is a different kind of strength that comes after everything has already happened. Not the strength that carries you through emergencies or forces you to make impossible decisions. That kind is loud, urgent, demanding. I lived with that strength for years. It woke me up before dawn, kept me moving when my body was tired, and whispered to me on nights when fear tried to sit beside me. But this strength, the one I live with now, is quieter. It doesn't rush me. It doesn't shout. It doesn't prove anything. It simply exists. And I didn't realize how powerful that was until I looked back and saw how far I had come without even noticing. After everything settled, after the messages stopped, after the emotions softened, after my children made their own peace with the truth, I thought life would feel anticlimactic, like the ending credits of a movie where you sit there wondering, is that it? But real life doesn't end with a dramatic fade-out. It continues, and that continuation is where meaning lives. I started to notice how differently I moved through the world. I no longer rushed to explain myself when someone misunderstood me. I no longer felt the urge to justify decisions that protected my peace. When people asked about my past, I spoke calmly, honestly, without shrinking or embellishing. There was no need. The story didn't own me anymore. One afternoon, while cleaning out a closet I'd avoided for years, I found a box tucked into the far corner. Inside were things I hadn't touched since the twins were small old cards, drawings, kindergarten art projects, scribbled notes that said, "Mommy, I love you," in uneven handwriting. I sat on the floor and went through them slowly. There were Mother's Day cards made from construction paper, photos of school events where I stood alone on the sidelines, clapping louder than everyone else. Programs from recitals and ceremonies where my name was listed as the only parent. I didn't feel sad looking at them. I felt proud. It's strange how society often frames single motherhood as something tragic or incomplete, as if a family without a father present is automatically lacking, as if love must come in pairs to be valid. But what my children experienced wasn't absence, it was abundance. They were surrounded by consistency, by honesty, by effort, by someone who stayed even when it was hard. And that mattered more than any title ever could. There was a moment, small but significant, that solidified everything for me. One evening, one of my children came home unexpectedly. No announcement, no warning, just a knock at the door and then their familiar voice calling my name. They looked tired, overwhelmed. We sat at the kitchen table like we used to, mugs of tea between us. They talked about pressure, expectations, fear of failing at something important. I listened. At some point they stopped and said, "I don't know how you did it. I don't know how you stayed strong all those years." I didn't answer right away, because the truth is, I wasn't always strong. I was scared. I was uncertain. I doubted myself constantly. But I showed up anyway. That's what I told them. "You don't have to be fearless," I said. "You just have to be present." They nodded. And in that moment, I knew the cycle had ended with me. I sometimes think about how differently my story could have turned out if I had chosen bitterness instead of boundaries. If I had chased validation from someone who refused responsibility. If I had taught my children without meaning to that love requires suffering. But I didn't. And because I didn't, they learned something else entirely. They learned that love should feel safe, that absence is a choice, that apologies without change are empty, that self-respect is not selfish. Those lessons will carry them further than any inheritance ever could. As for romance, I don't romanticize it the way I used to. I don't chase it. I don't fear it either. If love comes into my life again, it will have to meet me where I stand, not where I once was. It will have to respect the life I built, the standards I earned, and the peace I refused to surrender. And if it doesn't, I will still be whole. There was a time when I believed forgiveness was something I owed the world to prove I was healed. Now I understand that healing doesn't require generosity toward those who caused harm. It requires honesty toward yourself. And my honesty is simple. I don't forgive him. Not because I'm angry, but because forgiveness would imply a debt I no longer acknowledge. People often confuse forgiveness with moral superiority. But morality is not measured by how much pain you're willing to excuse. Sometimes morality is choosing not to reopen a wound just to make someone else feel absolved. As years continue to pass, I know my story will fade into something even quieter. It won't dominate my thoughts. It won't surface unexpectedly. It will live where all resolved things live in the background, acknowledged but no longer influential. And that's how it should be. If there's one thing I've learned from all of this, it's that life doesn't punish you for being abandoned. It reveals you. It reveals what you're capable of. It reveals what matters. It reveals who stays. I didn't lose love, I lost an illusion. And in exchange, I gained truth. This story doesn't end with forgiveness. It doesn't end with reconciliation. It doesn't end with regret. It ends with stability, with clarity, with a woman who no longer needs to explain why she chose herself. If you're listening to this and wondering whether you'll survive something similar, whether the ache will ever quiet, whether the weight will ever lift, whether the unanswered questions will ever stop haunting you, let me tell you this. They will, not because the past changes, but because you do. I kept going. I raised my children. I built a life. I protected my peace. And when the past returned asking for recognition, I met it with truth instead of guilt. That was my final choice. And it was the right one.